Hey Tea-heads, okay, let's have a proper chat about matcha. In this video, I'm going to be discussing the recent mega rise in popularity of matcha, the controversies and the inevitable backlash, and give you my opinions, which may just surprise you. Firstly, a little sip of the good stuff. Okay, let's give you a little bit of a background about me before we begin. My business, Mayleaf, has been sourcing and celebrating matcha for over 20 years, and we have been whisking up matcha and matcha lattes since 2007, way before the big matcha boom. My brother also has a big matcha business in Bangkok called Seven Sons, go check him out, that again has been serving top quality matcha way before the trend. So we've witnessed the changes in matcha, and I have lots of opinions about the recent matcha frenzy. Here's a super fast matcha history lesson for you. Matcha started in the Tang Dynasty in China around 1,300 years ago. And then a few hundred years later, in the Song Dynasty, Japanese monks brought the practice of whisking powdered tea to Japan, where it was further refined and evolved into a formal Japanese tea ceremony. Fast forward a few thousand years to the early 2000s, and the West started discovering matcha. We opened our tea house in London in 2007 and started selling matcha to a very niche community. In the 2010s, green tea and matcha in particular became more known as a superfood and began being talked about and consumed not as a tea ceremony ritual, but as a natural health ingredient. People started adding matcha to their smoothies and juices. Matcha became separated from tea culture and the way of tea and became a food supplement of sorts for those wanting health and performance. Then in the mid-2010s, a few matcha cafes started opening in the West and further removed matcha from its tea culture and more formal Japanese ceremonial approach. Instead, they imitated coffee and cafes and presented matcha in a familiar modern setting, serving mostly lattes, and pushed matcha as a coffee alternative with phrases which you've no doubt heard like calm energy and no jitter matcha. So matcha started to switch from superfood for health nuts to a coffee alternative for those in the know. Let me have a sip. Then in the 2020s, matcha blew up on socials for younger generations. Now, this was due to a convergence of many trends and cultural events, but let's look at a few in particular. So during the pandemic lockdown, I don't know if you remember, but when everyone was staring at their socials to find new things to do in their day, Dalgona coffee became a trend, drinking up a whipped up coffee, usually using instant coffee. And it became popularized and it spawned many variations. Since matcha is already traditionally whisked up and it had that green vibrant pop, it started to become commonplace to see Dalgona matcha on your feeds. And it normalized the idea of matcha as a fun, highly customizable beverage rather than a traditional tea ceremony. So matcha was already seen as a superfood, as a cool coffee alternative, and now this fun, vibrant DIY whipped drinks version of matcha was being pushed on socials. This all merged with an explosion of influencers and celebrities pushing the clean girl movement. Minimal makeup, expensive athletic wear, a health-optimized lifestyle, and a high-status image. They just needed the perfect drink to cap off the look, and a layered matcha latte became the instant visual shorthand for the clean girl aesthetic and was everywhere. To cap it all off, we had Brat Summer, a 2024 cultural phenomenon from the release of Charli XCX's album Brat. The color of the album and the huge marketing campaign was a bright matcha green, which instantly became a fashion and cultural motif. Now, the Brat movement was interesting because it was sort of chaotic, trashy, and anti-establishment. And matcha drinks started to become associated with a messy self-acceptance and the ideal accessory for a brat, with an ironic nod to the clean girl, hyper-optimized lifestyle. And so here we are, matcha. It has become part coffee alternative, part fun, part funky drink, part wellness and symbol of a healthy lifestyle, and part ironic, chaotic cool for the anti-establishment brats. A convergence of trends that made it just blow up. But matcha has really diverted far away from its roots in tea culture, and so the backlash has begun. Tea sellers, tea producers, and those passionate about culture and the sensitivities of cultural appropriation are starting to make noise and push back against this popularization of matcha. So let's go through some of their arguments, and I'm going to give you my own personal thoughts, some of which may surprise you. So, number one, matcha shouldn't be mixed. The matcha purists out there say that matcha is not an ingredient to blend into lattes, smoothies or desserts, but a reverential tea which should be honored by drinking it pure in the form of usucha or koicha or others. Now, my opinion is that yes, tea should always be tasted in its pure and unadulterated form, but that we should be free to celebrate tea by creating our own drinks or recipes too. Now, tea is always evolving, and while we should always continue tradition, we cannot hold back evolution. If people in the past refused to experiment with tea, then we wouldn't have some of the amazing teas that we have today, like oolong tea or black tea, and all of the tea drinks of different tea cultures around the world. Argument number two, matcha needs an official grading system. Everyone out there labels their matcha ceremonial grade, but this term actually doesn't mean anything and was a term made up in the West to denote a matcha of high enough quality to be enjoyed pure and in a ceremony. It's vague and it's basically a matter of opinion. So, in an attempt to distinguish high quality matcha from the lower grades used in most lattes out there, some people think that we need to develop an official grading system. Now, my opinion is that this is impossible, as it all boils down to a matter of taste. What's high grade to me may not be high grade to you. I do think, however, that transparent labeling should be encouraged, and all consumers should expect and demand to be told the following information by their supplier of matcha or the cafe that they're getting their matcha drinks from. Where does the matcha come from? When were the leaves picked? How long were the leaves shaded before picking? Which cultivars are used in the matcha? Is the matcha ground using traditional stone mills? Any seller that can't answer these questions are more likely, in my opinion, to be serving lower quality matcha, despite whether or not it's called ceremonial grade or not. Other than this information, a consumer has then to develop their own taste to discern quality. If a matcha is rough in texture, too grassy or bitter, and does not have enough savory to sweet umami or creaminess, then it is likely to be lower grade. If the matcha is complex and rounded with a long, sweet finish, then it is going to be higher quality. Third argument, the matcha shortage means Chinese matcha will flood the market. People are calling for matcha to be protected as a Japanese product, which implies that matcha made by other countries, especially China, will naturally be inferior. All right. There is no reason why excellent quality matcha cannot be made in other green tea growing countries. Of course, Japan has deep experience and a rich culture of matcha production, and it will take a while for any other country to catch up. But Japan is a small country and it will always struggle to meet the growing demand for matcha. And so it is inevitable that other countries must start to contribute to the supply. I have tasted Chinese matcha, which has been very good, some of it. Not quite at the level of Japan, but it is improving every single year. And with the supply shortage created by the matcha boom, there will obviously be more countries looking to meet the demand and diversify the market so that different grades can be matched to different matcha offerings. None of this is a bad thing as long as the origin is transparently labeled and communicated to the consumer. Next argument, matcha should be protected as Japanese heritage. It sort of rolls on from the previous one, but some people argue that Japan should have the sole rights to the name matcha, like a protected designation of origin, and that anything else should be called green tea powder or something similar. This is a bit of a controversial one because it depends on when matcha became matcha. The word matcha comes from a Chinese mocha and relates to the ground and whisked powdered tea which was consumed in the Tang and Song dynasty in China. This technique was then brought to Japan from China so you could say that matcha is originally Chinese and not Japanese. I know, controversial. If, however, you want to argue that matcha is defined by the particular processes developed in Japan afterwards, which crucially include shading the leaves before picking, then you may argue that Japan is the origin of modern matcha. But as you can see, it is a bit of a grey area, and ultimately I don't like the idea of trying to ring fence control over a style of tea. All that's important is that the sellers are again transparent about where the matcha is from on their labeling. Next argument, the matcha shortage leads to fakery. Tea fakery is everywhere and is a problem in the tea world both now and historically. Giving incorrect information about any aspect of a matcha from date of picking to origin and cultivar is easy, and it's not being checked at all. With the huge popularity of matcha, every cafe is calling their matcha Uji ceremonial grade because that's the traditional place for high grade matcha, Uji. But you can be certain that not all of this matcha is from there or from Japan itself. Now, this is a problem, but it's almost impossible to control. There have been many attempts to control things like this in the past, but they all involve expensive extra steps that can easily be subverted or sidestepped by suppliers. It all boils down to finding suppliers that you can trust and developing your own taste to find a top quality matcha for you. Next argument, the matcha shortage will cause a bubble. It is just basic economics, right? That when demand is higher than supply, the prices will go up as everyone competes for the matcha. If this continues without some way of increasing supply, then there is a risk that the price will reach such levels that there will be a huge drop in demand and the matcha bubble will pop. I have a few opinions on this one. Firstly, I think that matcha is here to stay. It has become such a mainstay in people's lives that it is unlikely that supply shortages and price rises will make consumers stop drinking. Secondly, I do think that some sellers are profiteering too much from the matcha trend and are charging crazy price hikes, but the market will eventually weed those bad players out. And lastly, it further emphasizes the point that matcha production should be encouraged in other countries so that the supply volume can increase and keep the costs acceptable. I know, controversial, but that's my opinion. As I sip on the last bit of this matcha. Oh, amazing. Wow, the sweetness in my mouth is just incredible. All right, next argument. The matcha shortage leads to low quality matcha. Again, as Japan tries to meet demand for matcha, it is inevitable that some shortcuts will be taken to increase yield at the expense of quality. Similarly, a lot of matcha produced in other countries will likely be average quality at best. And so the market will be flooded with low to mid-grade matcha. This is just inevitable. But this is just the way it is with all markets. As demand increases, the supply has to evolve, and there will be many more variations of the product on the market for consumers to choose from at varying levels of quality and price. The key, as always, is for sellers and consumers to practice discernment by learning about the world of matcha so that you can find the right quality and price point for you. As long as people continue to seek out the top shelf matcha, it will continue to be produced. Next argument, the matcha shortage will impact other Japanese teas. Now, this is actually one of my biggest concerns about the matcha boom because farmers are now incentivized to stop making their beautiful traditional Japanese teas like sencha, kabusecha, and gyokura in order to cash in on the demand for matcha. It is yet another reason why we should not be afraid of matcha being produced in other countries. Ironically, Chinese-made matcha may protect the traditional teas of Japan by helping to satisfy some of the demand for the bulk matcha market and Japanese farmers may be less driven to convert their farms to be predominantly for matcha production. And it is important that we celebrate these other amazing Japanese teas. And so all tea sellers should be encouraging matcha lovers to diversify their interest in tea and try these other brews too. Another argument, we should save the top quality matcha for pure drinks. The argument here is that the top quality matcha should be left alone for matcha connoisseurs to enjoy their pure usucha and koicha, and that if a cafe is going to be blending with milk and sweeteners, then it is wrong for them to use anything other than lower grade matcha. In other words, the proposal is that there should be a simple divide in the matcha market. One matcha for pure drinks and the other reserved for your lattes and other concoctions. But this presupposes that you can't taste the difference in quality between culinary and high-grade matcha when mixed into a latte. Is this true?
Right, I'm at the tea house and I'm joined by Joe. Hi, Joe. Thank you for taking part in this little experiment. So Joe is a kind of rarity these days because you haven't tasted matcha before, at least not for a while. Tell us your experience.
Yeah, so very limited experience with matcha. I've tried it once about 7 years ago, and it was maybe a tiny sip at a place I was helping out. So,
And do you remember what it tasted like?
not in too much detail. I remember kind of a deep herbal grassiness.
Okay.
Almost a little bit of kind of briny note.
All right.
Yeah.
So Joe tastes a lot for a living. Why don't you tell everyone out there what you do?
Yeah, so I'm general manager of a restaurant in North London called Perilla.
Excellent restaurant. Highly, highly recommended.
So yeah, my job involves lots of wine tastings. We change our menu quite frequently. Lots of tasting food, beers, spirits, kind of you name it, anything but tea. So,
Okay, well, that has to change, obviously, but we'll work on it. So what we're here to do, Joe, is to see whether or not there is a myth or not about whether or not you should use culinary grade matcha for your lattes. So just so you understand, you know that matcha's blown up, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of controversy about supply because the supply chain is getting very, very stressed out.
yeah.
There's more demand than supply. And so people out there are saying, if you're going to drink matcha in a latte, then just use the lower quality stuff because it makes no difference. Nobody's going to taste the difference between that and using the higher quality stuff.
Right.
Okay. And there are some names like ceremonial grade. You may have heard that before. It doesn't really mean anything. There's no actual standardization to what that means, but it sort of moves from ceremonial down to culinary grade. Mm-hmm. So what I've done is we've made a matcha using our ceremonial grade matcha, and we've made a matcha using the top selling culinary grade matcha, which I purchased from Amazon. So your job is to figure out which one is which and see whether or not you can taste the difference. And crucially, whether or not, if you do taste the difference, there's one that you prefer, you think that one is, better than the other or worth the difference in terms of cost. So you pick whichever one you want to go with first. Tell us about what you're looking at.
So I'm not 100% sure, but I've got a feeling that this is probably the culinary grade and the ceremonial grade, just off color, kind of a more deep mossy versus kind of brighter green.
Okay, so maybe what I'll do, because I think that is pretty obvious.
Yeah.
If you close your eyes, I'm going to give you a bowl. Yeah, so put your hands out, and I'm going to give you a bowl. All right, here you go. So have a sip of this. And you don't have to, you can do some descriptors if you want.
Yeah, I'd say on the nose, it's that kind of deep grassiness. Quite kind of bitter right at the, sorry. I opened his eyes. I was like, all right.
That's okay. That's all right. That's okay. So we'll describe it.
Okay. It's got kind of like a lingering bitterness.
Yeah.
That it's almost the kind of flavor I associate it with is like when you steep a English breakfast tea for too long. That's kind of my the main tea that I usually drink. I'd say.
Okay, all right. Let's do another sip with the ceremonial, and then you can go back and forth. At least let's try to describe the differences. I'm going to have a sip of this one. I haven't tried it yet.
I think you get a lot more in general from the ceremonial. That kind of, there's still that little touch of bitterness, but it doesn't sort of linger on the back of your palate. I'd say with this, kind of, it sits right on the back of my tongue, almost like, it's almost tannic. I would say, to kind of relate it back to wine, with what I usually taste.
Yeah.
Whereas this has a little bit more brightness, almost like a slight kind of herbal sweetness to it, which is a little more pleasant. Slightly floral as well.
Yeah. So much more complex in terms of a drink. You taste them together again, like just so you can remember. I know you probably don't want to drink too much of the murk. This one is a lot more spinachy to me.
Yeah.
This one tastes more like green spinachy.
It's quite one-dimensional.
Yeah. And also that dimension is very much in that sort of, it's green.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas this one here has, I think, a lot more depth to it. Like, it's just rounder, it's creamier, it's richer, and more complex. As a matcha noob, like, I guess, like, you need to develop your taste for the drink, right? But, like, would you, if somebody gave you that as your first matcha drink, do you think you'd be returning to it?
I'd say that's probably more aligned with my vague memory of matcha.
Okay.
Which is why I've not tried it again.
Right, exactly.
So, whereas this, I'd be much more open to having again. It's not something I'd kind of usually lean towards, the culinary grade, that sort of bitter green.
And it's just one note. It's such a one note drink, right? It's like it's like you had spirulina juice or something like that. It's just like, okay, it tastes green.
Yeah, it's quite dull.
There's some whatever, and it has a sort of like dusty quality to it, versus higher grades. Now, as I said, ceremonial grade really doesn't have any definition. Like this is you're just gonna have to find the cafe or bar or restaurant and taste their matcha. But the idea that you're not going to be able to taste the difference between a ceremonial and a culinary in a latte, because that's the argument.
Yeah.
The argument is, if you drink it pure, okay, you've got to drink the ceremonial. But if you're going to mix it with milk, it doesn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
I'd say
I hear the same kind of argument quite often with coffee as well.
Okay.
That people maybe wouldn't want to use kind of the really nice espresso roast for a latte.
Right.
But it does generally make a difference. So
it's the thing, is it's like cooking with wine as well.
Exactly.
You don't want to use like the most expensive wine, but you also don't want to use cheap wine.
You're going to enjoy. Yeah.
You're going to taste it as well. And the same applies. If you're using matcha as an ingredient, then just like any food and drink, the quality of the ingredient will always shine out. Thanks so much for joining me, Joe.
Thank you.
And I hope that you shift. Maybe slightly. Maybe. So we'll get there. We'll get there. All right. Back to the studio.
My opinion on this one is very clear. Overall, the higher the quality of matcha that you use, the higher quality your latte or blended drink. You can taste the difference. And just like any food or drink, the consumer has the option of paying less for a cheaper matcha powder, or paying a premium if they want that step up in the quality of the experience. Some consumers will feel that the difference is too subtle, especially if the drink is mixed up with loads of other flavorings, spices, or fruit purees. Others will always crave the pinnacle taste. The market will even this one out and decide, but we shouldn't be frowning on people or businesses that want to use the top grade matcha or high grade matcha for their blended drinks. It reeks of snobbishness and exclusivity. I also don't buy the argument that the top quality matcha out there is all being used up for lattes and there is none left for the connoisseur to enjoy pure. You can still get the great matcha. Sure, the prices have gone up, but again, this will settle once we increase supply. So there you have the main discussion points about matcha that I have heard over recent months. Overall, I think that this stratospheric rise of matcha should be celebrated. And yes, the market will take some time to even itself out and find its balance. Again, it may be controversial, and I may be accused of being biased to my Chinese roots, but I genuinely think that other countries can help Japan to meet the demand and thereby stabilize price, prevent a bubble, protect the higher end matcha, and allow other traditional Japanese teas to also flourish. The most important factor, as always, is the consumer. Educate yourself in matcha and taste, because ultimately your discernment will dictate the future of this mighty tea. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you're on the world by browsing mayleaf.com, and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the sublime stuff and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.